Hello, it's Scotland at 7 on the 1st of February. I'm Hugh Stewart. Now, tonight I'm joined in Edinburgh by Anthony Salamone, who's a managing director of European Merchants, a policy think tank. I think that's the best way to describe European Merchants. Is that right, Anthony?
That sounds good to me. Thank you, Hugh.
Right, okay, so we're going to discuss about six of the stories which have come to us today, which will have a European dimension. But Anthony, I'm going to begin with the First Minister's COVID update. In her weekly COVID update to Parliament, the First Minister has announced the current COVID-19 restrictions, including vaccine passports, will be kept in place for another 3 weeks. Ms Sturgeon told Parliament that this also includes hospitality settings, collecting customers' details for track and trace, and face coverings should continue to be worn in indoor spaces. On schools, the First Minister also said that pupils will still be required to wear face coverings in classroom, given the uncertainty about infection trends in the future. Ms Sturgeon began by updating on the latest COVID infections and raised the issue of the BA2 Omicron variant, which is around 1.5 times more transmissible than the original Omicron. The variant is currently under examination by scientists. The First Minister told MSPs, as members will recall, with the main Omicron variant, what is called the S gene is absent in the PCR tests. However, in the BA2 cases, the S gene shows up. Ms Sturgeon says that genomic sequencing is being used to investigate this further, adding that, so far I can confirm that Scotland has 26 cases of BA2 confirmed through genomic sequencing. But we expect this number to increase as more sequencing results are reported. And given that not all tests are genomically sequenced, it will be an underestimate of the presence of this subvariant here. However, the First Minister cautioned that there was no evidence that the BA2 variant is more severe than Omicron, or that it has the ability to escape the immunity given by vaccine or by previous infection of the virus. Latest developments then, and Anthony, as far as you know, are most people in Europe following Scotland's protections still wearing face coverings in indoor settings?
Well, I think that public health officials across Europe and indeed the rest of the world are paying attention to what happens in Scotland as they would in anywhere else. I mean, we see that there's quite a high degree of difference between different EU member states on how they're approaching sort of the pathway away from restrictions related to the pandemic. Denmark has announced that it is removing all of its pandemic-related restrictions. Other countries in the EU are making vaccines mandatory, which of course is a route which has not been taken in Scotland or indeed the rest of the UK really at all, except for healthcare workers, but I understand that that's not happening now. So, in short, yes, I think we can all learn from each other as we try to go through the pandemic, and hopefully that it's ending sooner rather than later.
Yes, I do remember a couple of weeks ago, Scotland's clinical director, Professor Jason Leach, advised that we certainly haven't seen the last variant of the coronavirus, and there's no guarantee that future variants will be any milder than previous ones. So for a moment, and at least for the next 3 weeks anyway, when it's going to be reviewed again, the First Minister says we must continue to wear masks indoors and on public transport. Oh, and by the way, on the story on Sajid Javid in England withdrawing the ban on health service workers. I gather the situation is that it wasn't really much of a problem in Scotland. There wasn't a ban. There wasn't any instruction that you must get vaccinated. But as far as I know, that's because most people have been vaccinated, so it's not really an issue. Just finally on that question, do you see there's a lot of throughout Europe, a lot of kickback against government protection measures? Are some European countries more prone to objecting to the government telling them what to do?
Well, I suppose it's an interesting question, the extent to which people are accustomed to the state sort of leading the way when it comes to sort of major issues in life. In many parts of continental Europe, the state can often be more forceful. So the idea of requiring vaccinations for people in France, for instance, maybe more something that you may be more likely to see than you might see in the UK or in Ireland, where concerns about civil liberties might be higher. But no less, in all or most of these European countries, the level of vaccination is already high. Indeed, in France, it's already high before President Macron decided to launch his campaign to annoy, as he said in so many words, people who weren't vaccinated. So I think the take up of vaccines in Europe has been high. That's of course because Europe, along with the United States, bought most of the vaccines that were available to be had anyway, at the expense of the rest of the world. So yeah, sure. I mean, it's been a long, difficult pandemic for everyone. And I suppose it underlines the fact that health is an area which is sort of, in large measure, left to individual member states to decide their policies. The EU does not have a role in sort of conducting health policy. The EU's role is to support member states in conducting their own health policies, and that can create challenges, as it has done, if you want to sort of maintain the single market or free movement of people in terms of the Schengen area at least, and you're trying to deal with the pandemic as well. It's an experience from which the EU has a lot to learn from, and I hope will.
Yes, of course, it does come up against free movement, which we support, of course. Scotland also is very highly vaccinated, I think. Yeah, it is actually true. I looked yesterday that there's a greater uptake of the vaccines in Scotland than in any other part of the UK. I'll move on, just briefly interrupting to say, I don't know if you can hear any noise. It's certainly coming into my right ear, but it's the Chinese New Year. Not just in Glasgow, but it's certainly very noisy in Glasgow tonight. I don't know if you can hear that. So we're actually just at the edge of Glasgow's Chinatown. So if you do hear any bangs, that's probably what that is. Okay. Now, our next story, back to the Scottish Parliament again. It remains the Scottish Government's firm intention to hold the National 5 higher and advanced higher exams this spring, Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville has restated. Taking into consideration ongoing disruption within schools, the Scottish Qualifications Authority, the SQA, has decided to invoke its Scenario 2 contingency and will provide revision support in early March to aid learners in preparing for their exams. It complements the significant modifications SQA has already made to the volume of assessment and to ease the workload of learners, teachers and lecturers. The SQA has also today announced a series of measures that will support delivery of the qualifications this year and that acknowledge the disruption caused by the pandemic. Firstly, exceptional circumstances backup for learners who are unable to attend their exam or exams due to illness or bereavement. Secondly, grading exams this year will look to factor in the impact of the pandemic on learners. And thirdly, once the results have been published, learners will have free direct access to appeal. Ms Somerville also confirmed that £4 million will be used to support schools and colleges provide targeted exam preparation sessions for learners who need it most over the Easter break. So again, this is an issue that's not confined to Scotland, of course. Throughout Europe, governments had to make the decision last year and the year before what we're going to do about exams. So it's been the same kind of dilemma faced everywhere. So previously, exams were basically replaced by teacher-marked assessments. So it looks like they're definitely doing the best in Scotland to go back to exams. Again, Anthony, do you know throughout Europe are governments making the same sort of decisions?
So, as it happens, Ireland announced either today or yesterday that they would be moving to their normal exams as part of what's called the Leaving Certificate or the Leaving Cert. So the idea, yes, is to go back to the traditional exams as they existed before the pandemic. Of course, not everyone agrees with that course because the sort of the downsides of the exam-based approach to assessment have been well trailed. Which is to say that exams don't suit everyone. If you need to sort of cram all of your knowledge into a sort of 2-hour, 3-hour paper, does that really assessing what you know, what you've learned, as opposed to coursework, which may suit people depending on different learning styles and so on. So I think that Ireland and perhaps other parts of the EU are moving back to sort of the exam-based systems they had before the pandemic. But there is a conversation to be had about whether exams really are the best way of assessing what pupils have learned and setting them up for success after school.
Yes, there might be some long-term look at that in Scotland because the government has announced a review of examinations, but that's certainly not going to be for this year, so that might be looked at in future. Okay, moving on to our next story. Again, this focuses on a debate today in the Scottish Parliament. Trump-style voter ID plans have been rejected by the Scottish Parliament in a vote which refused our legislative consent motion, with only the Conservatives voting to approve the UK government's UK elections bill. The vote was on whether the Scottish Parliament approved of the UK elections bill, which the SNP has expressed its grave concerns over. The plans will force voters to present ID when they turn up at the ballot box. The SNP has also expressed its concerns on a power grab from Westminster on the Electoral Commission and threatens to a power grab on the Election Commission and threats to the independence of that body. Commenting, the SNP's member of the Scottish Parliament, Cockab Stewart, said, "I have grave concerns about the UK elections bill and the plans to force voters to bring ID with them to vote. This will disenfranchise thousands of people in Scotland from expressing their democratic wishes. The plans will most likely discriminate against those from poorer backgrounds and ethnic minority groups who are less likely to have any form of identification. This is Trump-style voter suppression making its way into the UK, courtesy of the Tories, and it's a dangerous moment for our democracy." The Scottish Parliament has sent a clear message to Westminster that their plans for voter ID are riding roughshod over the Electoral Commission, and these are unacceptable and should be stopped. In the United States, it's being reported that ex-President Donald Trump was directly involved in efforts to use national security agencies to seize voting machines after his 2020 election loss, pressing his lawyer to make queries as advisers drafted two versions of a related executive order. The New York Times, citing three people familiar with the matter, yesterday reported that Trump directed Rudy Giuliani to call the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, to determine whether it could legally take control of voting machines in key swing states. That effort came amid two previously reported attempts to seize the machines. Trump's outside advisers pressing to have the Defense Department confiscate them, and Trump asking Attorney General Bill Barr whether the Justice Department could take them. Barr immediately rejected the suggestion, according to the Times. And the New York Times again outlined a direct attempt by Trump to push the effort, citing people who were briefed by those involved or who had first-hand knowledge. The reports were the latest to highlight the outgoing president, the Republican president, and his advisers' attempts to overturn the 2020 election, which Democrat Joe Biden won by more than 7 million ballots and by 306 to 232 votes in the Electoral College. The reports come as a US House of Representatives committee investigating Trump supporters' deadly January the 6th, 21 attack on the US Capitol is ramping up its efforts before public hearings expected this spring. Trump on Tuesday issued a statement again blasting the House probe. That's the House of Representatives. So, Anthony, let's take up the second of these points, which is the efforts, over a year and a half ago, by Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani to overturn the election. Now, first of all, it seems extraordinary to me that anybody could ever consider asking the Department of Homeland Security to interfere with the ballots. Have you ever heard of anything like this happening recently in democratic Europe or democratic anywhere?
No is the short answer. I mean, I think it became clear that Donald Trump, in his final weeks and days in office, became ever more desperate to find some way of staying in office, and that he, was obsessed by that. It's not really a surprise to hear that he was considering any way he could to sort of remain in office, because he was very clear that he never accepted his loss. And I guess he still doesn't accept his loss in the election, and he did lose, by the way, just in case anyone was in doubt. I suppose that the Trump and the way he behaved in office and sort of the transfer of power after the election in 2020 demonstrated, as many people have realized in the United States, that so much of the American system, in terms of sort of the power of the executive and indeed how Congress works, is based on tradition and based on assuming that people will behave rationally and legally and assuming that people will behave as they're sort of meant to by tradition and convention, and when a president sort of throws convention out the window, the safeguards aren't really there as much as you might want them to be. And I imagine that would be one of the focuses, perhaps of the January 6th Commission of the House of Representatives, but more broadly as people in Washington consider sort of what to do about ensuring that a president as minded as Trump, be it Trump himself or indeed someone else in the future, is less able to try to sort of wield the institutions of the state to keep themselves in office.
Yes, as we reported last week, the House, the House committee is desperate to get the investigation on quickly, because if the Republicans win the midterms in November, the committee itself might be closed down, so they have to get the report out before November. Now, let's take this back to home now, because the other side of Trump's voter suppression, or rather Republicans, is, as we've seen, many states in America are in fact making it more difficult for voters to turn up. Is this the same sort of thing? I'm talking about voter ID, insisting that you have to have ID. And this is based on the idea in America that a significant number of voters were fraudulently turning up and voting for Biden. Again, that's been disproved. Trump took that to several court cases, Trump's lawyers, and I think he was thrown out. His suggestion that votes were being fiddled was, I think, thrown out in every single case. But the Conservatives in the UK are doing the same thing. Is there any evidence that there is illegal voting in the UK?
No, is the short answer. It's minuscule. It's both true in the United States and true in the UK that sort of voter fraud or impersonation is barely exists, and certainly not to justify the kinds of measures which have been proposed, in the sense of voter ID or other measures. In the United States, it's a broad swathe of different kinds of initiatives to make it more difficult for people to vote. So ID is part of it, but also, for instance, shortening the time that people can cast their ballots ahead of the election, which was a big thing in the United States in 2020, measures introduced largely because of the pandemic. And so on. It's a whole host of measures on that basis. But no, voter fraud is really not an issue in the UK. And it's a useful sort of talking point or excuse for sort of restricting access to voting. But the evidence is not there to support any degree of widespread voter fraud or impersonation or anything like that at all.
Yes, well, indeed, that's the opinion of every party in the Scottish Parliament today, with the exception of the Scottish Conservatives. Now, what's happened then is that the Scottish Parliament is refusing to give legislative support to a UK bill. So that then gives the UK the chance. It puts the ball back in their court. Are they going to listen to the Scottish Parliament, or will they press ahead without Scotland's legislative consent? Let's see what happens there. OK, police now will be told if there is a fine on the Prime Minister or anyone else in Number 10. So today we hear that Number 10 has, this morning, Number 10 in London refused to commit to disclosing the names of anyone in Downing Street who might be fined by the police over parties, including Johnson himself. This line also sounded unsustainable, not least because, even though the Met says it would not disclose the names itself, it's notorious for leaking information like this to the media. And so this afternoon, Number 10 shifted its position. At the afternoon lobby briefing, talking about this issue, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said, "Obviously, we are aware of the significant public interest with regard to the Prime Minister, and we would always look to provide what updates we can on him specifically." Asked if that meant that Number 10 would say if Johnson was given a fine, the spokesman said, "Hypothetically, yes." OK, so there's a perfectly clear hypothetical answer then. So I guess it looks like the spokesperson is saying, well, even if we try to keep it quiet, that somebody in London will get hold of it anyway, and it'll be in the 6 o'clock news, whether to keep it quiet or not. Is this the power of the press then, holding truth to power?
I suppose so. Yes, as they said themselves, the public interest in this is very high, and obviously we all want to know what the eventual outcome is, and it's right for us to know.
I don't myself. Again, I keep asking you this question about does this happen in other countries. I can't think of any example of a recent sitting Prime Minister being fined for anything like this. Have you heard of anything of this sort happening before? When has any Prime Minister been found guilty of this would be a criminal offence.
Yes, I mean, from my understanding, is the last time that a sort of prime minister was interviewed by anyone was Tony Blair. I forget exactly why. I think it was sort of one of the honour scandals. And yes, I imagine you have to go back quite a long time to find a prime minister who was ever in this position, if you could find one at all. It's obviously not great for those of us who are interested in seeing, politics focused on public policy and issues of importance rather than the actions or otherwise of the prime minister. It's not good for democracy and not good because we have many other pressing policies and issues, not least from the pandemic or dealing with Brexit or the economic recovery or otherwise that all require our attention. Instead, we're spending a lot of time talking about Boris and the actions of him and the people that work for him during a very difficult period in the pandemic.
Yes, he's supposed to be getting on with the day job. One reviewer I did read today was suggesting that maybe Johnson is becoming the new Berlusconi because he was widely regarded as, frankly, a bit of a joke by other countries. Is that how do you think people are beginning to look at Boris Johnson's premiership, as a bit of a joke, a bit of a show?
I think that many of the leaders of the EU member states already had that view of Boris Johnson before he became prime minister. They had that view when he was foreign secretary, and that they engaged with him back when the UK was still a member of the EU, if we remember that. And I think that basically every foreign minister and prime minister saw then that he was not a serious character.
Well, that brings me to our next story. Yesterday, there was a phone call scheduled between Boris Johnson and Vladimir Putin, and he was forced to cancel that phone call yesterday because the call has apparently been rescheduled for Wednesday, tomorrow. The Prime Minister's spokesman has said that the Kremlin rejected a request to reschedule the phone call for today. So originally, remember, this phone call was supposed to happen yesterday, but the Prime Minister was required in the House of Commons to explain himself over the Sue Gray report, part of which was released yesterday. It's not clear yet if the initial rejection of today's phone call stems from the genuine rescheduling issues on the part of the Kremlin, or if it was a calculated snub by Moscow to highlight the UK's irrelevance and Boris Johnson's weakness. But in any case, it dealt a blow to the Prime Minister's efforts to present himself as an important diplomatic player in the Ukraine crisis. The Monday call was cancelled so Johnson could make a statement to MPs in Parliament over the Sue Gray update on the Downing Street parties during lockdown. The Prime Minister did fly to Kiev this morning, offering the Ukrainian government £88 million to fight corruption, part of a show of solidarity with the country in its threatened confrontation with Russia. Boris Johnson will be hoping the brief visit takes attention away from his domestic political travails over the sanctioning of Downing Street parties during lockdown. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had been due to accompany the Prime Minister to Ukraine, but was forced to cancel after she tested positive for COVID. Ms Truss appeared unwell as she delivered a common statement promising Russian oligarchs would have nowhere to escape UK sanctions if they invaded Ukraine. Writing in The Guardian today, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon expressed her concerns for the risk of war in Ukraine. The First Minister began by agreeing with Boris Johnson's statement to Parliament last week, in which he said, Ukraine asks for nothing except to be allowed to live in peace and to seek her own alliances, as every sovereign country has a right to do. The irony of this statement was probably lost on Boris Johnson. However, Ms Sturgeon could not find much to support in the previous position of the UK government concerning Russian funding of the Conservative Party and the past failure to implement strong measures to prevent the potential for money laundering and corruption in Londonrad. The First Minister called on the Prime Minister to finally take action, saying that he must recognise that his government and his party have enabled this situation, and he must acknowledge that the most resolute action he can take at home is to rebuild his government's tattered reputation. So let's deal first of all with the second point there, which is about money laundering in London. Now, I'm quoting the House of Commons' own report from 2 years ago, which is mainly dominated by Conservatives. And you can find this on the government website. The report into Russian funding found indeed that billions of Russian money is really washed, is laundered through London, perhaps first of all going to British overseas territories. So it's a well-known route. Anyone in Moscow who has some way or other acquired a lot of money by some sort of means can find routes to get it to London and to get it turned into property in London. So the parliamentary report makes it perfectly clear that that's a huge conveyor belt of money, really stolen money from the Russian people ending up in London. And since that report came out 2 years ago, the government has taken no action on that. So do you think, is that a big part of Johnson's dilemma, trying to be firm with President Putin after cancelling his phone call yesterday, but at the same time being aware that the City of London is a home to huge amounts of dodgy Russian money? Is there a dilemma there for Prime Minister Johnson?
So yeah, I mean, I think it's very unfortunate that Boris Johnson wasn't able to have his scheduled conversation with President Putin because it's a very important time for Ukraine, a time of great uncertainty, a time in which it's essential that allies within the European Union and NATO, so Europe and the United States and others, are work coherently. Excuse me. Naturally, President Putin doesn't have to worry about such measures of accountability. So clearly, there would never be any chance of his schedule being derailed for a similar reason. But nevertheless, yes, I mean, it's good. I think it's very good that Boris Johnson has gone to Ukraine, as indeed many other leaders have from Europe and beyond, to demonstrate support for Ukraine at this difficult time. Yes. So in respect of the sort of the issue of the so-called Londongrad. Yeah, it's obviously something that needs to be addressed, and as you said, it's been highlighted by the UK Parliament, by the Intelligence and Security Committee. And the question is, do sort of politicians in Westminster have the sort of the resolve to take the kind of action that would be needed to make it much more difficult for sort of money to be laundered, be it from Russia or anywhere else? As part of the sort of response to the Ukraine crisis, the UK government has said that they wish to bring forward new legislation to make it easier to sort of levy sanctions against oligarchs who have sort of assets in the UK. I suppose we need to see the details of what they propose, but that sounds something that is reasonable. I guess the question is not just the sort of the present Ukraine crisis, but the role in which the UK plays in sort of movements of finance, including illicit finance. And I guess the best thing to do is to accept the reality of the role which the City of London, or sort of London generally, presumably unwittingly plays in fraudulent transactions, and what newer measures be taken to try to address them. And that's very important, and not least because if and of course we hope it doesn't happen, but if Russia were to take a further aggression against Ukraine, and the sanctions are levied by the UK and the EU and the US and others, if the people who are targeted by the sanctions are able to evade them, including by means of sort of assets and resources in London, then the purpose of those sanctions will not have been fulfilled. So it's very important that be addressed.
Now, the thing I pointed out on the UK Parliament Committee's report into Russian money is that the committee was dominated by Conservative MPs. The Guardian article today, where the First Minister is drawing attention to this problem of dirty money, also points out that the US government has said that democratic sources in the US have said that the problem they have is that the UK Conservative Party is a beneficiary of this London money. So that's been spelled out, but I don't think this was actually in the Westminster report. I don't think the MPs said that. But the fact is that the Conservative Party itself receives a lot of money from London-based Russian oligarchs. Do you think there's any is there a need here for political parties to register money that doesn't come from within the country, that doesn't come from voters in the country where the money is being spent?
Yes, I don't know the details of UK finance law, but I thought that donations from abroad weren't really accepted anyway. This, as I said, this is a very important time for Ukraine. I have not read the First Minister's op-ed, but based on the extracts which you have said to me, I think it's unfortunate if the First Minister has decided to focus on the funding of the Conservative Party or internal UK politics. This is about Ukraine and Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, and obviously what we need at the moment is to be united in declaring that Ukraine has the right to decide its own future, the sovereignty of its own territory, its own foreign policy and alliances. And that should be the message, and that should be the focus, not sort of internal UK politics, in respect of funding of political parties or what have you. So yes, it's important to close loopholes that may exist in respect of money laundering or fraud in the UK. Otherwise, the focus needs to be on deterring Russia from invading Ukraine.
And let's turn to that point then, because the obviously it's not exactly helping if Prime Minister Johnson had to cancel his phone call yesterday. Do you think that Britain has an important role to play, or would it have mattered? I mean, there's obviously a great deal of diplomacy from the European Union and mainly from NATO. Is this about Boris Johnson trying to get in and say, yeah, we're involved in it as well? Or will the peace talks or whatever kind of negotiations are taking place, will they go ahead anyway, regardless of whether Vladimir Putin is listening to Boris Johnson?
So the UK certainly has an important role to play in the Ukraine crisis. Obviously, it's very regrettable that the UK left the EU, and of course, the UK left the EU 2 years ago, so yesterday into today. But yes, the UK is still a member of NATO. The UK is one of the few serious military powers in Europe, along with France. So yes, the UK has an essential role to play in the sort of response from sort of the Euro-Atlantic area towards Russian aggression or potential Russian aggression, future aggression towards Ukraine. At the same time, it's also clear that the UK government is eager to use this as a means to demonstrate sort of the UK's continued role in the world, or sort of give some sort of substance to a global Britain foreign policy. I suppose it's logical if they would try to do that, but regardless of the politics of trying to make it look as though the UK is still important in the world, the UK does have a role to play here. And yes, it's important that that different European leaders try to engage with President Putin to and convey the same message. Of course, that's challenging for the European Union because there are different views and different interests at stake within different member states. The Baltic states, for instance, very concerned about Russia's potential for future action in Ukraine because obviously they have a very deep and challenging history with being part of the former Soviet Union when they did not wish to be so. To countries like Italy, which clearly has plenty of people who are more focused on the economic implications of a rupture with Russia. To Germany, where similarly, there's a focus on the economy. France, President Macron is eager for the EU to be seen to be strategically autonomous, even though that's clearly not the case. So yes, a lot of different interests within Europe, which are hard to reconcile at times to present a united common position. At the same time, it's also clear that the European Union as a collective actor has not been able to play the kind of role it wanted to, in the sense that President Putin has clearly bypassed the EU to dialogue with Washington, or indeed with individual EU member states, and also, of course, the UK. So yes, Brexit is very regrettable. Of course, I wish Brexit didn't happen. Nevertheless, the EU and the UK should work together on Ukraine. I think that they are, and I hope that that kind of cooperation will continue regardless of sort of post-Brexit issues between the EU and the UK.
Yes, some voices within the EU, notably Guy Verhofstadt, for example, use situations like Ukraine to say, well, maybe it's time that the EU did become more of a centralised political and military force, which basically it isn't, as you correctly point out. It's between Putin and NATO, right? There isn't a European army. But I think Verhofstadt is in favour of starting one. Is this sort of situation more likely to cause a kind of centralisation in political and military power within Europe?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if I remember correctly, Guy Verhofstadt is a federalist, so I suppose he always advocated for a federal Europe. As we have seen in recent years, including the pandemic, politicians will just use whatever events take place in the world to advocate the positions that they already held. So yes, no, I don't see any sort of. I don't see the Ukraine crisis as being some sort of catalyst for the EU to move in a inherently federal direction. If anything, it will. It has the potential to exacerbate existing divisions within the EU in terms of how to deal with Russia, and demonstrate the challenge in trying to conduct a foreign policy, bringing 27 member states together. There's a lot of talk in the EU about trying to move away from unanimity. So at the moment, EU foreign policy decisions have to be agreed by every EU member state, and moving to instead to what's called the qualified majority voting system, under which foreign policy decisions would not require this unanimity. Of course, some member states would be less eager to do that. But if you really do want to move in that direction of saying, we want to apply QMV to foreign policy, then, there are real questions to be answered about how the EU is going to make real compromises and to make them in a timely fashion. So it's not just about does the EU come up with a good decision or the right decision, it's how quickly does it take place. The EU is not famous for rapid decision making. So I think that the EU will have to try and learn from the experience of the Ukraine crisis and the way in which the EU has not played a core role as a collective. I mean, in terms of addressing the crisis. And if the EU really does want to be a global actor, as President Macron wants, for instance, then how are the member states going to reconcile their differences more effectively and more quickly?
Yeah, I suppose that's a continuing dilemma that European countries have to face. It's the balance of individual national sovereignty with European unity. So we'll move on to Europe now because it's been strong, of course, as an economic power, but as we've seen, can't really be a centralised political power if the 27 states still insist on their own sovereignty. So let's introduce this next story, which is, as you said, Anthony, about the 2-year anniversary of Brexit actually coming in. To start, the SNP has criticised the Tory government's Brexit plans after the 2 new YouGov polls on the anniversary of the UK's exit from the EU revealed that a majority of people across Great Britain believe that Brexit has not benefited the UK at all, or by not very much. The YouGov poll found that 65% of those asked across the UK said that they think the UK has either not benefited at all or by not very much since the UK left the EU. In Scotland, the results suggest the figure rises to 75%. That's dissatisfied. A separate YouGov survey also revealed that 47% of people asked across the UK think that the UK got a bad deal from Brexit, with only 7% believing that it was a good deal. In Scotland, the figures suggest 59% of those asked thought the UK got a bad deal, with only 2% believing it was a good deal. The polling also makes concerning reading for the Tory government after it found that only 17% of Tory voters think the UK has benefited a great deal, and just 13% think that Johnson's deal was a good deal. Commenting, the SNP's Europe spokesperson, Dr. Philippa Whitford MP, said, 2 years on, and businesses and households across the UK are still feeling the deeply damaging impact of Brexit. Despite all the rhetoric, it's telling that a majority of people across Scotland and the UK think that the UK has not benefited very much or at all by Brexit, and that the UK got a bad deal. What will make for even more concerning reading for the Tory government is how few of their own voters believe that Brexit has been good for the UK. The reality is that Boris Johnson's extreme Brexit deal has been nothing short of an unmitigated disaster, piling on the hardship for families and businesses. So Anthony Salamone, we'll talk in a couple of minutes about the government's paper celebrating 2 years of achievement. We'll come to that in a minute. First of all, the YouGov poll also on 2 years. So that's not surprising, really. It shows we've heard that for a while now. A lot of Leave voters have now begun to regret it. So this makes it very clear that most people don't think it was a good idea in the UK, and also, not surprisingly, the number in Scotland is much higher. So that really reflects the original deal. So are you surprised at all by this, the news from England that most people are beginning to think it was a bad idea?
No, I mean, I think it's important to remember, as I suppose you highlighted, that the result of the EU referendum at the UK level was close. It's not as if there was a great victory. Certainly not a great victory, even in England for leaving the EU. It was always a close result, and I think many people who supported the idea of leaving the EU or happened to vote to leave the EU for whatever reason, including if they were unhappy with David Cameron or the UK government at the time, or they didn't really think that Brexit would actually take place, even if they did vote for Brexit. Through the years of sort of Brexit chaos and uncertainty and confusion and fear, to realize that it really wasn't that worth it to leave the EU after all. And indeed, what benefits have accrued, but preciously few, if any, and certainly not worth the going through the process of leaving the EU and adopting a very minimal, damaging relationship with the EU compared to what we used to have before. I think the UK is on the path of divergence from the EU. Of course, Brexit was set that in motion, but it's clear that the UK government under Boris Johnson is eager to pursue that vigorously. And of course, that's silly. The EU is the UK's most important partner for trade, both in terms of imports and in terms of exports. They're our closest neighbors, fellow Europeans, friends, family. And to pretend that the EU is not important to the UK or the UK's future or the UK's prosperity, which is the core of the sort of rhetoric and ideology of Boris Johnson and other Brexiteers, is profoundly wrong and damaging to the UK. And I think many people recognize that.
Now, let's turn to the report. If people are interested, if they've got nothing else to do, they could read the 108 pages or so, I think, of the UK government's celebration of Brexit 2 years on, which was published yesterday, I think. So I've read half of it, and I don't know if I'll put aside any time to read the other half of it. But I don't know if you've had a chance to digest it thoroughly, but I've put it under several different categories. I'm going to begin by asking you about joining AUKUS. That's UK joining the Australian and American Pacific Trading Cooperation, and also the TPP, which is also the Pacific. So the UK said in this paper today, celebrating what we've achieved with Brexit, they've celebrated sort of joining or becoming associate members of these trade organisations in the Pacific. So what's the logic of being a member of a trade association in the Pacific and not one here where we live? Can you see any logic to that?
Well, it's been very clear that the UK government under Theresa May and Boris Johnson after her have been desperate to try to find alternative trade agreements that just weren't the EU to sort of demonstrate that the UK had an independent trade policy, that trade deals were being struck, and that the UK was sort of not focusing on the EU. And I guess TPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade sort of Partnership, was part of their ambitions on that. I think it's thoroughly misguided and driven by this Brexit ideology. The EU is the UK's most important trade partner, and we now have a very distant relationship with the EU compared to previous EU membership. The UK has some access to the single market, but it's nowhere near what we had before. And we can see the consequences of that in terms of reduced trade between the EU and the UK, and in short, that we in the UK are poor and will be poor as a consequence of Brexit. And a trade deal with Australia or with New Zealand or with other partners in Asia is not going to make up for, by any stretch of the imagination, what we have lost as a consequence of Brexit. As for other deals like AUKUS, the UK, as far as I'm aware, could have well pursued AUKUS still as an EU member state if it wanted to. Many of the sort of so-called achievements of Brexit were really down to the UK government's, lack of interest in pursuing those policies before leaving the EU. Even on silly things like the color of the passport, there's no legal requirement that passports of EU member states have to be a burgundy color. It was just an intent to do so, try to make things easier for people recognizing passports that were from the EU, and to promote sort of a general solidarity. Croatia's passports happen to be blue, nothing to do with the UK. But they happen to be blue, and I don't think there's any plan to change them in the near future. And I don't think the Commission really cares. So on all these so-called benefits of Brexit, many of them could have been achieved without leaving the EU anyway. And even if they were, how much of a difference do they really make to improving the quality of people's lives, which ostensibly should be the purpose of a government? And was it worth all of the sort of difficulties that we have endured as a result of the Brexit process and the minimal relationship that the UK now has with the EU?
Well, you've raised the question of things we could have done anyway. Now, looking through the report, this is the UK government's 2 year on what we have achieved report. They also include things like free ports. I think there's going to be something like 8 free ports, including here at the weekend, 2 in Scotland. Now, first of all, I'm not really convinced that free ports are a great thing anyway, but leaving it aside, I believe that they could have set up free ports if they wanted to. That wasn't a ban. There's also going to be new trade and investment hubs in Scotland, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Darlington. Again, would the EU have prevented that? And another third one, I noticed that we're going to have bigger and heavier lorries. So would the EU have prevented any of these things happening anyway? And even if so, are they a good thing? Do we want bigger and heavier lorries with longer trailers? Do you happen to know about that one? Was there an EU ban on what weight of trucks we drive on Britain's roads?
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there, were EU rules in respect of lorries, because obviously EU legislation. When it comes to the free ports, yes, I believe there are a number of free ports within the EU. So clearly, the UK could have moved in the direction of free ports if it wanted to. I agree with your view that I don't inherently see the value of free ports as the UK government or indeed the Scottish government has described them. But I can see the attraction to a government in London which wishes to be seen as being sort of pro free trade. It has I can see the value for them in terms of the optics of it, but I'm less convinced as to the substance of why these would be good for Scotland or indeed the rest of the UK.
Yeah, areas of low regulation. I mean, it's dubious whether that's a good thing or not. So, turning to regulation, there's lots in the report about how we're going to have dynamic regulation. The regulation on new industries, for example, on digital and artificial intelligence. The paper today says the UK government paper says we're going to have unprecedented growth in these new industries, and we're going to have dynamic and flexible regulation. But at the same time, the regulation is going to be tough. So this is great. We're going to have the best regulation ever invented, and we're also going to have, what did they call it? We're going to have world leading innovation and technology, right? So that's good, isn't it? Everybody's going to do world leading innovation and technology in AI. Again, is there any reason why we couldn't pursue that as a part of Europe? They're doing it too, aren't they?
Yes, certainly. And of course, the trade and cooperation agreement really, in the main, covers goods trade, not services trade. So if you're looking about, first of all, what's most important to the UK economy, and the UK is primarily, or at least majority, a service-based economy, and indeed, technologies of the future, as the UK government has sort of touted both in this report and elsewhere. As we're talking mainly about services trade, and the UK is disconnected from the EU. And that affects, businesses trying to be part of these technologies of the future. If you want to have businesses which can trade with one of the largest economies in the world, which is in the EU. If you want to be able to attract talent from across the EU, over 450 million people, all of those things are more difficult now if you're based in Scotland or if you're based in the rest of the UK than they were before Brexit. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're interested in business, you can definitely move to the EU, be that in Paris or Berlin or Frankfurt or Dublin or Amsterdam, and access everything that the EU and the single market has to offer instead of London or indeed other parts of the UK. And I think that obviously that would be in some respects a gradual process you don't see businesses flock on one particular day to move to other parts of Europe. Uh, but over time, you'll see that the sort of industries that the UK was hoping to sort of build on probably don't end up being as promising as people hoped they were. And a large part of that is that the UK economically and otherwise is disconnected from the EU and our closest neighbours, and that is a significant negative.
On things we could have done anyway, the paper today also says that we will be able to certify geographical origin. This particularly refers to foodstuffs, for instance, Stornoway black pudding or Melton Mowbray pork pies. They say under our new world leading regulations, you'll only be able to make Stornoway black pudding if it actually came from Stornoway, right? So the idea is consumer protection. But again, I believe that's been in Europe for a very long time, hasn't it? If you make champagne, it can only come from Champagne. So that's been part of EU law. So again, are they at it here? This idea that you can only certify our product under a new UK system. Couldn't we do that before anyway, under the EU system?
Yes, yes. So I mean, the protected destination of origin and geographical indicators is something which is important to some EU member states, France in particular, also Italy to some extent, and it's become an important part of EU trade policy and sort of the legislation underpinning the single market. So yes, if you apply at European level and receive sort of a European geographical indicator, then that can be very valuable to you. And of course, geographical based products in Scotland and in other parts of the UK did apply for those EU geographical indicators and were able to make use of them. So in this case, as in many others, the UK is simply replicating something which the EU already had from scratch and trying to present it as something new and exciting. This already exists at European level. Of course, there are great benefits to producers who have the European certification because that could be used worldwide and backed by one of the largest economies in the world, the EU. Makes it much easier that those will be enforceable in other parts of the world, not just in the EU. If you're trying to do trade, for instance, with the United States or with China or with India, and you have an EU geographical indicator and the European Commission and the European Commission's trade team behind you, that you're more likely to be successful in ensuring that your sort of standards are upheld than if you're one country, the UK.
David Frost, Lord Frost, in his previous job, worked for the Scottish whisky industry. They did have issues a few years ago about Scotch, the use of the word Scotch. So would that be an example of it? Because I think Scotch used to be produced locally in places like, China, for example, but I think China recognises that Scotch can only be made in Scotland. So again, are you saying that would be backed up by the European Union? So it would be easier to enforce the brand name and the trademark of Scotch if you were in Europe. Is that what you're saying?
That is linked with what I was saying. Yes, sure. Of course, if you're a member of the EU, excuse me, then your concerns in terms of trade are taken on board by the European Commission when the Commission on behalf of the member states is negotiating trade arrangements with other countries. So yes, when the UK and Scotland was still part of the EU, yes, the European Commission did work on behalf of producers of Scotch in Scotland in terms of trade negotiations, I believe, with India, if I don't remember correctly, and others to ensure that sort of products made in the EU, and that included us, the sort of were not undercut by products from other parts of the world. So yes, yeah, and of course the EU is very influential in that sphere. If the EU is not successful on traditional foreign policy, the EU is quite successful on economics and trade, given the size of the single market and the EU's collective influence on rules and standards of global commerce. It's an area where the EU is successful in shaping what happens in the world and for defending its member states and their businesses in those kinds of contexts.
Yeah, there was actually a test case a few years ago which establishes the Scotch brand name in China. That was done by the Chinese authorities, but that was when Scotland and Britain was, of course, a member of the EU. So maybe that's an example of that. Just a final point, we're running short of time, actually. There's A lot more we could discuss on the achievements, the 2 years of achievements. Let's look at some more of the achievements. The white paper today, or the booklet from the UK government, praises the ending of free movement. I'll just give you a few of these, Anthony, so you can celebrate with me. We've ended free movement, and we've ended Erasmus and replaced it with the touring scheme for student exchanges. We've also streamlined imports and exports, so the truck drivers waiting in the queue at Dover will be pleased to hear that, and they'll also be delighted to hear that we've cut £1 billion from business red tape. What else have we done? Oh yes, we're also going to be able to have more. Duty free booze is back at the airports, and we're also going to be able to have more nuclear power stations. So those are among the achievements that we're celebrating today. Are you happy about any of those?
Well, I think most people know what my views on Brexit are, but to me, it just underlines the very unfortunate way in which the UK government has gone about the Brexit process, under Theresa May, but especially under Boris Johnson. As I said earlier, the EU referendum was a close result. As you cited, many people in the UK regret, a majority of people in the UK regret this Brexit, which it hadn't happened. So for the UK government to instead champion Brexit as if it was something that had universal or widespread public support and something to be celebrated, that's clearly not where public opinion is. The UK is divided on this issue, or it has been divided for a long time. And to pretend that those divisions don't exist is really unfortunate. Because I think many people, deeply regret the fact that we left the EU and that we are outside the EU and that we have a distant relationship with the EU. And trying to say that ending the UK's participation in the free movement of people, which is about people having the freedoms to pursue their careers or their study or their lives in other parts of Europe, to say that removing that something to be celebrated is really perverse, and it would be far more appropriate for the UK government, among many other things, to recognise that many people regret Brexit and still wish it hadn't happened, and that it is and will be a mistake in terms of the sort of the history of the UK.
I suppose we should end up on political realities because all we've said, of course, is that we can't think of any, and we haven't really got much of an upside. But the fact is, UK is not going to rejoin the EU anytime soon, if ever. So why do I say that? Well, the ruling Conservative Party is against it in Scotland and in England. The Labour Party is against it. The Liberal Democrats are against it. So the only people in favour of it then are the Scottish Green Party and the SNP. I mean, so it's not going to happen, is it? So, my question to you is: would it be realistic for pro-Europe people in Britain to start saying, "Well, let's have a better alignment with Europe. Let's stop scrapping the EU laws"? That's another thing in today's report. One by one, they're going to look through all of the EU-sourced laws and scrap them. So, would it be better just to say, "No, let's align our laws with Europe and then get back into the single market"? Would that be a realistic political strategy?
Well, I agree with you that that the major political parties in England, as far as they're concerned, the debate on EU membership is over. It's very clear, as you just said, the Conservatives, Labour, and the Liberal Democrats in England, all are talking about moving on from Brexit, whatever that means for them. So yes, the question is, if you are pro-European and you want to see the UK rejoin the EU, yes, you have to sort of start small, I suppose, and grow your campaign. And one of the ways to do that is to stop the UK from diverging further away from the EU. That's a question of retained EU law. So that's the EU laws that were sort of frozen in the UK at the date of Brexit. Yes, stopping divergence there, but divergence will naturally happen if the UK doesn't keep up to date with new EU laws and policies in the future. And you see divergence in both respects. And I think that people on the pro-EU side, especially in England, because of course we voted to stay in the EU in Scotland anyway, need to reflect on deeply on how the EU referendum was lost in England and Wales, what it says about the political culture in England in particular, and how people can rebuild sort of, I don't know if it's trust in the EU or support for European cooperation or whatever it is, that things have to change. It's not as if there could just be a general election and magically the UK could reapply to join the EU and everything would be fantastic. The political culture in England has to fundamentally change from what it is today for the UK to really ever be in a position to reapply to join the EU again. And I think that would be a process of decades.
Yep, not happening anytime soon. Well, that's about it for tonight. I would really like to have another hour to discuss these items with you, Anthony. So thanks to Anthony Salamone for European Merchants for joining us tonight for really interesting insights into Europe. And let me just finish off by saying again, thank you to our regular viewers and subscribers to this channel, and to ask you if you can pass us on to anybody else. We rely entirely on our subscribers' funding to keep us on the air. We have big bills to pay this month. Well, we're always now, as everybody, the electricity bills going up. So if you'd like to look at the website, which is on the screen just now, it would be great if you would consider being one of our subscribers. And if you follow on the website, you'll see a link where you can become one of our supporters. So it'd be great if you could do that and pass it on to a friend as well. So thanks to Anthony Salamone, and thanks for joining us at Scotland in 7, and I'll be back tomorrow. Bye now.